Hi, welcome to the July 2010 Planning Commission meeting, Radnor Township. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Let's start with the minutes from last month's meeting. Any comments? And if not, may I have a motion to approve?
Approve.
May I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Minutes are approved. First thing on our agenda is SD 2010-S03, Estate of George Atterbury, deceased, Morris Dorrance, executor to subdivide existing 13.6 acre parcel into 4 lots at 615 Newtown Road. Dan, is that on for tonight, or has that been taken
Yeah,
off?
the applicant has asked that that be tabled for the next month.
Thank you.
They had a neighborhood meeting, and they had a couple of things to tweak
Great.
based on the feedback.
So we're going to table it the next month. Then we're going to move to our second item, which is discussion concerning the PLU zoning change. Dan, did we get the county comments on this?
Yes.
Can you
yes.
give us kind of an overview of what they had to say?
I'm sorry, there's some people meeting in the back. I want to make sure, I thought they were coming to speak on this agenda item, so we're going to check to see if they are. The county gave us their comments back on June 17th. They did approve it. They highlighted a couple of the notations that the township had come up with. And let me just, there was a couple of comments that they brought up about accessory uses. They felt that, I don't know if you have it in front of you, but page 3, the middle of the page talks about accessory uses. And they talk about, however, the existing section does not indicate specific accessory uses that are permitted. So they really don't go into any more detail other than that for that section. And then,
What number is that? I mean, I printed it out on my computer at home. H, L, K, what?
they all say 3 now that I'm looking at it.
What paragraph?
I have, it looks like the 4th page. I think I told you the 3rd page. Accessory uses, the middle of the page.
Oh. Dan's talking about the comments from county.
From the county
Oh.
comments.
Shoot, forgive me. I don't have that.
You don't have the letter?
No.
Oh, here.
Your copy?
Dan, do we have copies of the letter from GCPC out in
Yeah,
the public?
that was out, was sent in an email.
Yeah.
last
No, no,
week.
I'm sorry. Is it available for the public?
No,
I'd have to look.
Okay.
I
I
don't know.
don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Let me look real quick. I'm sorry to interrupt. You were saying, I'm sorry, sir.
Under accessory uses, one of the county comments was that, however, the existing section does not indicate specific accessory uses that are permitted. Doesn't go into any more detail, but that was one comment that I picked up on. And then on the next page, in the first paragraph, so they are recommending that the township establish an open space zoning district. So it sounds like other communities have an open space zoning district. And then it goes on to explain that that could be broken out to deal with township buildings and other structures versus open space. So they were the only 2 substantive comments that I picked up from their letter of the 17th.
Dan, from a timing point of view, where are we with this process? Are we up against anything, or is this just working through at our pace?
Well, there's no time constraint as there is with a subdivision or land development, but this is something that staff is trying to get processed and pushed through to the commissioners so that we get everything is advertised properly and notices sent properly. Okay. So this is the second time it's back.
Ed?
Go right ahead.
we're going to start comments?
Go right ahead.
Okay, great. So a couple of things about this strike me. The first thing is that I actually spoke to a school board member because this PLU change really calls for a much more expanded definition of the public schools. And I was surprised when I spoke to the school board member with whom I spoke that the Board of School Directors is not aware of these changes. So that's a little bit concerning to me that we, as a commission and at the Board of Commissioners, would make such an extensive change to the definition of public land with regard to the school district without the school district directors having a chance to discuss this in a school board meeting and its implications. You know, there's a group of people in the town who probably follow township business, and there's a group of people who probably follow school board business. And C calls for, you know, B calls for a very expanded definition that could really impact them. So, you know, my first comment off the bat is that I would want to see the school board have a conversation, maybe at their facilities committee meeting or at a public meeting, about the implications of this expanded use. Because I know, for instance, this comes down to impacting the land out at Amnon Canal out in Garrett Hill. That's one thing that struck me. The other thing that struck me is that, you know, we're the subcommittee that's working on the zoning ordinance for planned institutional, which is comprised of 4 members from this group, 4 members from the comprehensive plan. My understanding of why we're doing that is that, you know, the Board of Commissioners, as part of a follow-through on the comp plan, is revising the ordinances in the township. So I was actually surprised to see this on our agenda. I would have expected this to be something that would be vetted through a subcommittee, kind of looking at all the various implications. Because the third thing about this, the proposed changes, they are pretty sweeping, and the Delaware County Planning Commission's letter, their comments really reference this. They say that, you know, our proposed changes are going to create far more uses, both primary and accessory, for public land. And as a township, we may want to consider how we categorize public land in the township, create new categories. If we're going to expand the use of it, we should probably reclassify some of our land. The other thing that came up for me when I read this was with regard to, I have to just look at the letter, about the wireless, about the cell phone towers, M1. Right when I came on the board in January, we worked on the new wireless communications ordinance, and I don't really know what happened with that. I think we passed it along to the Board of Commissioners, and it's not shown up on their agenda yet. And I would be concerned about us expanding the use in this ordinance of cell phone towers when in that ordinance, the wireless communications ordinance, we actually were seeking to limit the height, and we were putting some restrictions in place. And I'd like to see that go through the process and be approved by the Board of Commissioners before we then take this ordinance and expand all the public land uses where wireless towers could be placed. I feel like this is kind of the cart before the horse. And I remember, you know, I read the minutes from last month, so I know that there are some issues with how we're using some of the public land in the township right now and some of the buildings, and, you know, have some things fallen through the gaps in terms of our allowed accessory uses. But I don't want to see us rush and throw this in place so that we're in compliance in one area and create an unintended consequence somewhere else. My final comment about it is I think this has some pretty sweeping implications, and I know I'm reluctant to pass it during the summer. That's, you know, that's hands down, I'd be reluctant to passing it during the summer. But that's...
Summer because?
A lot of people are not around.
Okay.
I think I've had the experience in the public of coming back from vacation, and a couple of things had been surprised by some changes. And you know, this ordinance was not available on the website as a download, the proposed changes. So I'm not sure that the public's even aware of some of the really vastly expanded uses that are called for here. So that's my comments.
Any other comments?
Susan, isn't radio and television towers are already permitted, so it's an expansion of a use? Because it's only the underlines of the changes.
Well, we made some proposals
correct.
to limit the height of communication towers. And so if we're going to expand the spots where they can be, I'd rather see in place the ordinance we made where it limited the height.
I'm not disagreeing with you, I'm just trying to clarify. And I think the height restrictions you're talking about were on utility poles on the street, that we were talking about that, because they were repeaters that would boost the signal.
You know what, I'm not even, at this point, I was like, yeah, I know we had that thing out there. Whatever happened with it? It was one of those things that went into the black hole.
They talked about in the right-of-way and out of the right-of-way. There
Right.
were two different categories, and that dealt with the height. This is only making it more specific, and other telecommunication facilities. I mean, as you said, the underlined is what is being added. It's just like the schools, right now, under item B, all the current ordinance says is public schools. I mean, when I saw this, I just saw it saying, it's clarifying what the public schools are. I didn't see, this is really defining the public schools, where before it only stated public schools.
But see, this would, under this new accessory expansion, for instance, a cell phone tower could now be put on Emlyn Tunnel because it's an accessory of the school district. It's not where one of the schools is located, but it's a property of the school district. Sometimes in clearly defining things, we restrict in some ways, but we expand in others. And I feel like this needs a little bit more vetting.
Other comments? I guess the one general comment I want to make is to everyone, and especially to Matt, a few others who have been on this board for a while. You know, we heard from Don Curley when he was one of our members and vice chair that we really need to take the code from top to bottom and rewrite it, not focus section by section. And I'm wondering just out loud here, is it time to say we don't want to do it this way? We don't want to do it piecemeal. Let's put the subcommittee or the committee together and ask the commissioners to take the time to look at the code from top to bottom. Matt?
Well, Susan and I and Doug McCone have just spent 3 hours of our life starting that process with the
Right, with the-
planned institutional zoning. My assessment is that, yes, I think it's time for the township to look at a more comprehensive, holistic view of the zoning ordinances. I do understand some of the reasoning behind getting this zoning at least amended or changed based on some of the things that are happening within the township. And I think it's specific to some of the current zoning that's in place for places like the Willows and some other, other township-owned property. Having said that, it might be worth, as Susan stated, maybe a more measured approach and not try to take this one section and try to adapt it. I would also hope that the township would get more focus on these ordinance changes as it relates to other zoning classifications, because we're just looking at really one so far. And there are other districts that we need to kind of get moving on. So to answer your question in a very long way, yes, I agree with that. I think we do have to take it more on a holistic basis.
Well, let me just chime in. You were at the meeting last week. How long do you think it's going to take for planned institutional?
Dan, it's a very good question. I think if we could come to the commissioners with a draft in the next 30 days, and we could open it to public meetings and have public input, and we stayed on course, I believe we could have the planned institutional zoning district amended by the 1st of October. If we want to continue to open up discussion along very ancillary subjects during these meetings, then it could go until the end of the year. But I'm optimistic that we can focus it and get it done by the end of September.
My point is, that's one big ball that's in the air, and Susan and I are not going to agree on this, but I think this is a pretty small ball that shouldn't be up in the air. I don't think we're making substantial changes. I think we're clarifying a lot of the language that has been kind of hanging out there, and we frankly have been ignoring a lot of things, like the Willows, like the caretakers at the Willows, talking about this building, renting out a portion of this building. So I don't think that we're really making a lot of changes from what we have been practicing. This is clarifying and trying to make it clear what we've been practicing.
But does this, it seems to me what this does is, though, it permits the installation of, for example, a cell phone tower on Tunnel Field.
Well, that's the
Always did.
owner's decision.
No, but before it only allowed it for a municipal use. It only allowed it for a government use. Now it's saying that the tower can be or for a licensed FCC carrier. And that means that you could put a private thing up on there. The school board, if they chose to do so, could lease the last 5 square feet in the corner of the field and put up a tower exclusively for AT&T's use or for a lot of private cell phone uses. It would not necessarily have to be the township that runs it, at least according to what the letter I'm reading.
Well, it's the property owner's decision.
But if the property owner is the school board,
Right.
and what we're talking about here is we can choose to prevent the school board from doing that if we want to. Now, whether we want to do that or not is, a public policy question, but I don't know if I want to do that.
Well, and again, as I said at the beginning, the school board directors are not even aware of this proposed change, which, is disconcerting to me. I think that it should be getting talked about at the school board just so that, I don't want to see a cell phone tower on the middle school field or, in the center of Wayne, and yet that could happen here. I think that's something that's pretty major, Dan. Some of these other things, I understand we want to make sure that we're in compliance with our current, with how we're actually using the facilities in the township. I understand that we want to be in line with that with regard to our ordinances. We certainly don't want to be going around blatantly in violation of them, but that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. I don't want to rush through the process of thinking through an ordinance so that we're no longer in violation of certain aspects of accessory use. I don't think that's, this is my opinion, I don't think that's good planning. I just don't.
I'd like to offer up maybe a near-term compromise, Dan, because I think I understand what the need is, particularly as it relates to this building and potentially the Willows Cottage. Could we address those areas in the ordinance where we can make some accommodation for those potential uses or those current uses that haven't been provided for, and then maybe take a more measured approach on the balance of the use?
Well, it's this board's decision which way they want to go. I'm just trying to give you the background where we are and why this is before you. If there's a problem with cell phone towers on school property and you feel that changing some of the language it gives you a level of comfort, I mean, that's fine. I'm just concerned about it being tabled, waiting for it to be done holistically sometime in the future. And I think there's a lot of other ordinances that need to be addressed more drastically than this one. So I guess I'll throw this out. If you're not comfortable with this, if you want to make the changes, that, as I said, that's your call. But is it something you want to come back and look at again and run through the implementation committee and have them look at it and come back and do it again in 6 months or whenever it's appropriate?
I guess I'm saying, just as an example, if we had a organization that was willing to sign a lease for the space in the township building where we could derive some revenue and we could get that done in the next 30 days, I would rather address that as an amendment or a change to this, as opposed to saying, let's go through all the special or the use regulations and elect on each one of these to make modifications. And that,
Might I add something?
sure, absolutely.
First of all, you could always recommend the approval with the exception of the changes to M1.
Sir, just identify yourself.
John Nagel.
Thank you.
Bryn
We
Mawr.
know that.
The other thing, you'll note that, Matt, this isn't just about future use. This is about current non-conforming uses within the township. So this came out of the hearings, the public hearings we had when the lease for the Willows Cottage was up. And at that time, in reviewing that issue, we looked at all our PLU land and found that we had violations everywhere, if you will. So most of these are conforming changes rather than future changes. So I'd like you to take that under consideration. And I agree with Susan, your comment about the school board, but again, you could pass it, forward it to the commissioners with the understanding that the school board needed to see it before we ruled on it. I mean, you have that kind of capability.
John, do you know why it was that this wasn't the first ordinance for implementation to, sounds like this one, you guys were aware there were pressing issues?
This one started before that committee was put together.
The need to change it, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm surprised this isn't our first ordinance to be working on.
No, this was done by staff. This was not given to the committee to work on.
Okay. The other comment, Dan, just to chime in with Matt with regard to the timing. What I saw from last week, the work that we did with the subcommittee on the PI ordinance is, I think, long-term, if we're not going to, Cheryl Tamula actually gave some great background. There had been a thought back in '88 to redo all the ordinances. I mean, it's been going on for a long time, the knowledge that we need a big overhaul, but it's quite expensive, and that's why the committees are doing it on a volunteer basis. But what I noticed Saturday morning is that, or whatever that was, Wednesday night, the vast majority of our time, after we dealt with some ancillary issues, was kind of undoing things that were proposed. So I think moving forward with any of these ordinances, let's just have the public in there from the get-go and save ourselves the time in the long. I know that feels onerous, but ultimately we spend as much time undoing or hearing concerns about things that have been changed that if the public were part of the process from the beginning, I think long-term we'd save ourselves some time. And so maybe this is something that we could get through quickly if the process of it were changed up a little bit.
Could I ask you a quick question? We're changing private library or public library to private library. What was I should have my code with me and I don't. I just got back from Western New York about 3 hours ago. So why are we eliminating public library and just having exclusively private library, or are we adding that?
It's an A. They cover that in A. They expand it as libraries under municipal buildings.
All right.
Which is your point. You're clarifying some things, Dan, that make it clarifying all the different municipal, county, state, or federal buildings and uses in A, which is great. I don't really quite get the notion of why we need private libraries, but...
But it says here that the permitted use of public library is proposed to be changed to private, not, made so that it's public and private.
No, as Susan said, under item A,
Mm-hmm.
library is included in there. So on the second to the last line, talking about recreation facilities, library, rooming.
I wonder if Delaware County just misread that, Doug.
All right. Fair enough.
Any other public comments? We started there. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ed. Rick Barker, Lewis Lane, Garrett Hill. I believe the origin of the changes to this are to accommodate the existing uses. Now, I'm not aware, to answer this thing about the library, but it seems like when they, in J, underline private, that's an addition. It means that there's some private library that is, a current use that's non-conforming, and they wanted to accommodate that. I shouldn't say wanted to. I believe the staff was asked to come up with a ordinance which would accommodate the current existing uses. So I presume that that's the intention and the reason why all the language has been added, that we have this type of use going on in PLU right now and it's non-conforming. And given that little preamble, I'll talk about my specific concerns. Now, when you're talking about B, public schools, this expands it to other school uses than strictly just a school building. Now, this is probably nitpicking. I don't think we can interfere with the school board's use of their own property as a municipality. But I, as a member of the Garrett Hill Implementation Committee, and just as a member of the public personally, wouldn't expand this, wouldn't make this expansion explicit. I don't think there's any reason to, and the school board certainly didn't grant the Garrett Hill Committee any latitude when they were protecting their own interests. However, at least in the area of B, Susan, this promotes the school district's interests and actually limits the township interests. Although, again, I think that it's largely moot because I don't think there's anything we can do as a municipality. I think case law supports the fact that you can't interfere with the school board's use of its own land. They are, in fact, a state entity, and we're a local entity. Now, this other thing, this would be M1, I believe, yes, where they're talking about they've expanded it to other communication, radio and television towers, and other communication they've added, and then they talk about when operated by township government agency, public utility corporation, or federally licensed telecommunications company. Again, I believe that we probably have these uses going on, and that's why they tried to accommodate them. But what I want to point out is that PLU is already a district that's described in our wireless ordinance as a permitted non-right-of-way. How do you say it, Dan?
We talked about in the right-of-way or outside of the right-of-way.
An outside of the right-of-way use, and it's got its own standards. So I would be particularly concerned about Section 2, the repealer. It seems to abrogate our wireless ordinance. So I would ask the township solicitor to make sure that, in fact, our wireless ordinance is accommodated in Section 2 with this repealer, because you simply don't want to open this up. And again, I presume this other telecommunications has to do with cell phone, which isn't included here, which, of course, most of us rely on now. We do want good cell phone service at Radnor. So the question is, how do we best, provide ordinance for it? Again, this goes to the federally licensed telecommunication company. I feel that this is probably directed towards a cell phone. Let's see. Those are my only specific concerns. My general concern is, though, and John Nagel actually spoke about this at a commissioners meeting, if he's still here. Yes, he is. When this was referred to Delco Planning and to this Planning Commission, that perhaps we do need a new open space district. And I'd like to point out to the Planning Commission that one of your members, Julia Hurl, talked about when we were coming before you at the Garrett Hill process, in her opinion, the need for a township-wide open space district. Now, in the Garrett Hill planning process, we identified a need for 2 open space districts. One would be the recreational or active open space district with its own set of standards, and one would be the passive or conservation open space district with another set of standards. Now, in Garrett Hill, we had a parcel that we zoned Garrett Hill open space, and this is now ordinance in this township. Again, was against the planning recommendations, but the commissioners saw the wisdom of this at the time. I believe that if we enact an open space ordinance that is for recreation, that this will perhaps supersede the Garrett Hill open space district, that could be folded into it appropriately. But I think it's very important that this commission and township residents understand that the only open space that is protected in Radnor is, in fact, in Garrett Hill. It's Garrett Hill open space. PLU does not protect open space. And I believe this is what you're struggling with right now to a degree. So I would encourage the Planning Commission to come forward, as I believe, I haven't seen the Delaware County Planning Commission recommendations, but I believe they've come forward with a recommendation for open space districts to truly protect open space in Radnor. It's something that I'm sure you're aware of, but this is something that the various polls and votes that have been taken have demonstrated that this is widely supported by township residents. So I think that that part of your recommendation for this PLU should be also to examine and create new open space districts, again, passive and conservation. I mean, passive conservation and active recreational. Again, Ed, to address your concern about dealing with this piecemeal, my opinion on this is that the way to do it properly is, of course, to use your suggestion to do it holistically. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a practical reality in Radnor. I don't think we could fund it, and again, it's a lot of work. I just think it's beyond our capability right now financially. So again, I think we need to rely on our volunteer committees and organizations to help craft this. I could see how, for instance, I mean, again, there was a West Wayne overlay that's being considered. It's now in hiatus, but I think it'll eventually come back around. And once we get these overlays, completed in these areas, perhaps Latham, also, I mean, again, where it involves ordinance, then we should actually have an effort, and I believe that this should be funded, to consolidate and to take the best parts that come out of each of these things and try to streamline, make the definitions all compatible. I think that's when the holistic approach makes most sense. But I don't think we can afford, for instance, to drop PI. And Susan, I'm a little bit torn here, but I'm going to agree with Dan. I don't think the concerns here are great enough that this couldn't be acted upon. I think you have some issues here. I think the repealers are concerned. Again, you might want to look at which specific non-conforming uses these things accommodate. That perhaps might be sensible for the Planning Commission to do. But at the same time, this is not the ball of wax that PI is, and some of these other things that really ought to receive attention. This is again, to accommodate the uses we have now. So again, my concerns are primarily that I think you ought to recommend open space districts, and watch out for that repealer. I think that might throw you off, and I don't see any reason to increase B to include anything other than public schools.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Dan, the process from here, if it was approved tonight, where does this go next? Does this go to zoning? Or would it
No,
go right to
this goes back to
commissioners?
the Board of Commissioners.
Okay. Any other public comment? Any other comments from the board?
I'm just going to follow up on what I said earlier. I think what I would like to see, and being part of this plan institutional subcommittee, I would like to see our group lead the way in coming back not only with our changes to the ordinance, but also some process. So if one of these come back to the Planning Commission, as an example, maybe we give ourselves a 90-day window with 2 or 3 public meetings, and then it goes to the commissioners. Because I empathize with Dan. I mean, this could be out there in January, February of next year, and there's no reason for it to be. And I think PI would be a great example if we said to ourselves, we're going to come before the commissioners and tell them by October 1st or November 1st, we'll have the language changes, we'll have had our 2 or 3 public meetings, we'll have had plenty of advertisement on the website. There's no reason why we don't get into changes, modifications, and then do the next priority zoning classification.
So how would you propose that fits into the schedule with PI? You're saying
As it relates to this?
as it relates to this.
Well, I said it earlier, I think if we need to address some non-conforming uses like a Willows Cottage, or if someone has some interest in renting space upstairs, we address that tonight, and then I think we let another subcommittee take over the other sections.
I think that's a great idea. The pieces that I have an issue with are L, what deals with the other telecommunications stuff. I think that because that's a more broad-based policy kind of thing, that would be something that we would want to take. Now, if you wanted to limit that, for example, if somebody wants to put cell phone antennas on the existing tower behind the municipal building, that's one thing. If you said this is limited only to existing towers, I wouldn't have a problem with that doing it this evening. I don't like the modification to L for something we would do now. I think that would be something that would go along with Matt's more broad-based kind of plan. But as far as the rest of the stuff, you know, if it's addressing a specific issue, yeah, I would do it soon.
It kind of seems that this isn't a big priority item as far as, you know, some of the other more pressing issues, and it seems to me we have to come up with a list of exclusions. So either we're going to exclude a few things here that bother us, or we're going to go address a few things that are out of non-conforming right now. And so we really just have to come up, which is a shorter list. It just seems to me if there's a few things, it just seems it might be easier just to exclude the one or two items here that are kind of bothering us, and then just pass this, and then to your point, Ed, maybe we should just come up with a priority list of items we're going to address in order, in sequence, and this goes on the list, but based on its priority level. You know, maybe at the next meeting or subsequent meeting, and follow your subcommittee's processes to go through with the next level.
So would somebody like to make a motion?
So I would make a motion that we pass this subject to a few exclusions where we think there are items that need further consideration, and address them when we take the holistic approach.
So can we list those exclusions? Who wants to start?
I think Don already started with the cell phone towers.
Well,
But
I would,
do we need to exclude all of MI1, or can we just take out our federally licensed telecommunication companies?
What, if we can, Steve, why don't we start at the beginning, because if there's a couple of others that are...
Good idea.
I personally don't have an issue until we get to K, which is the use of the township building. I'm not sure why we need this language. I thought last time we talked about this one, Dan, didn't you say that there's already an exception for for-profit uses within the township-owned buildings?
No, I believe we talked about why does it say nonprofit? Why wouldn't it say nonprofits or
Profit versus
for-profits?
nonprofit.
Well, that was my point. Is that already included in the existing language?
No, K is completely new. That's all underlined, so all that is new.
see, basically, that we had this conversation a couple of months ago where it was whether or not we would want to allow for-profit organizations. So this new language really only provides for nonprofit organizations. It does not, because we have no existing allowance for for-profit.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I think I don't know who it was, but I think someone referenced if there are any contractual agreements between the township and that prospective use or tenancy or whatever we want to call it, I think there has to be some way to call that out. There should be no,
Conflicts?
yeah, there should be
Yeah,
no.
are we trying to drive towards no conflict versus profit versus nonprofit?
Yeah, I mean, I think nonprofit is more innocuous, and I would say let's go along with that. I'm in agreement, but I'd take it one step further and say without a contractual relationship to the township.
Without a conflict or relationship.
Well, I mean, we have a contract with the Friends of the Willows Cottage. I mean, that's a nonprofit.
I guess
So
what
I
I'm,
guess, go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if there's a way that we could word it where it wouldn't necessarily, as an example, if an auditor or an accounting firm was doing work for the township, I wouldn't want them leasing space on the third floor.
Agreed.
Okay.
But
I
that's
mean,
a
I think
for-profit.
that everybody,
If that's the, okay.
I mean, I think kind of philosophically, isn't that the problem with the for-profits is that whether they have a relationship with Radnor or not, is there some kind of implied endorsement for a for-profit company that they're, quote, allowed? And allowed's not the right word, but if they happen to be the one who rents space in the township, I would imagine, Dan, that we're trying to avoid giving an implied endorsement of any for-profit, or was that not really a concern, and we just figured there's enough
No, that-
nonprofits out there who need the office space? I don't know.
no, that's why it's nonprofit
Right,
here.
that's-
For
okay.
that exact reason.
Yeah, that's what I figured. And for my part, for right now, I would want to see the expanded language of B cut for right now, taking Rick's comments and also my own. I think that the school board should, maybe it's not a long conversation over there, but, and if, Rick, if your understanding of the law is that school district can kind of do what they want with their property anyway, then, again, I look at this stuff, what's the benefit to Radnor residents to expand this language then, if the school district can already basically do what they want?
If you'd like, yeah. They might have to jump through another hoop. This would provide a potential for a little bit more public input. If, for instance, they didn't have carte plans to put a bus parking lot wherever they wanted on PLU. Again, I don't see any reason why this needs to be expanded. It doesn't interfere with their rights. Again, it promotes the interests of the school board at the expense of the interests of the township residents.
Dan,
It's a little nitpicky, but it's there.
Dan, do you know what they're trying to get at by expanding this? Anything specific? Oh, Steve?
I think it's just to clarify the public schools.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything
So nothing
nefarious
specific.
trying to be slipped in. It was just,
Yeah.
we're defining all the other uses, all the other categories. We're defining this one.
Is there currently a definition of public schools in the existing ordinance? And if there is, what does it read? Again, forgive me. I normally have that thing with me.
No.
So it's adding a definition.
Well, it's adding, it's clarifying it. I don't know that I would say it's a definition. It's not going to be added to the definition section. It's specifically in this section.
Okay, I can get over K. The next one I would address would be L1, would be accessory residential or caretaker use within existing Radnor Township buildings.
Matt, let me back you up for one
Sure,
second. We went back from B to K. So let's go through these one at a time. Anybody have any issues with A? Okay. B, we have a question, correct? C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, now K. Thank you, Matt.
I have a quick question. Why would there be a private library operating on public land? Give me an instance.
Well, I don't know if you could think of something like the Radnor Historical Society, if that.
Is that public?
I don't know of any private libraries in the township, but
Is that public land, Historical Society building over there?
no, that's not. No, there's no residential there.
Well, even,
More than likely.
Yeah, I don't even know of any private libraries. But that doesn't mean one
wouldn't open
want
up.
to open up.
All right, back to K, Matt.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Okay, I'm just going to throw this out here for, look, K, I can overcome any objections if it's a nonprofit organization. L was where I was going.
Okay, go right ahead.
Okay. subsection 1, I think there has to be a distinction made as to whether the caretaker, or in whatever case may be, is not either a township employee or an appointed official. I think that would make me more comfortable. I think if there's a third party and they want to rent a township-owned facility to their employee, and there's an arm's length, I would feel better than allowing such a broad definition. I understand that. I'm just thinking worst case scenario, if there was a situation, and I know it's occurred in the past, where there's an employee living in a township-owned property, it would make me consider some other potential uses before I allow that. I can just put it out there.
Matt, your concern is that that could be financially abused?
It could either be an impropriety financially. It could be something as ridiculous as, we get to a point where we're giving people places to live in lieu of pay. John Nagel, the king of Radnor, decides to move into the Willows Mansion and call it his home. Okay.
Nonprofit.
I'm just putting it out there.
Right. Well, I can tell you that we have a caretaker at one of our buildings that's an employee. I mean, and her job is...
Township employee.
She works for the township.
Okay.
Can we require that?
Can we require that they not
No.
work for the township or
No,
not
that they
live-
do work for the township.
I'm sorry, I missed that?
Require that they do work for the township.
You're saying do work.
You're going the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point is, and I don't want to belabor it, I think there's certain cases where that could be potentially abused, or there could be some unknown consequences that, could develop. That's where I'm going.
Again, just the fact that we're trying to think this out. To
Matt,
me, this isn't even...
Could I address Matt's concern?
Sure.
And it may answer your question, too. Valid concern, but is it appropriate that this is where you would address that? I mean, today we have 2 or 3 places in the township that have caretakers. They're all township employees. It's considered to be very important because the presence of a caretaker minimizes problems with the properties. So, again, if the issue really is abuse of that, then there are probably other places in the administrative code where we could describe those situations and control them, that it's got to be fair market value or part of the income, salary, things like that.
If that was the way to address it, then I would be in agreement. I just think there's some things about having employees of the township living in township residences where there's no transparency to why they're
Yes,
there.
I don't disagree at all.
And how that could potentially benefit them as certain classes of employees over others. That's where I see there could be potential for abuse.
Yeah, I agree 100% with your concern. I'm just suggesting that the zoning, or this zoning isn't the place that you address that kind of thing.
And that's fine if we have an agreement that there's some other restrictions or regulations within the township policy that would address those concerns.
And actually, mine have to do with the nonprofits. This came up with our PI discussion with regard to an institution that has faculty living on campus whose children attend the school district. So under this permitted use, which to me isn't even clarified that it could be a caretaker who's really the caretaker for, but an employee of a different organization that just happens to be leasing space from Radnor. If that family were to have children, are they considered residents? Do their kids get to go to Radnor Township schools for free without paying any property taxes? I mean, and it sounds like a small thing. It's become a rather financial burden at the school district for the one institution. So it's just, it's not, it doesn't, this L1 doesn't even seem clear enough to me about whether or not they're a Radnor Township employee or an employee of yet a third party leasing our property but living in our township.
Well, the only thing I would counter to that is if it is a third party, presumably they're paying rent, and the township is getting some benefit. And I certainly don't want to have anybody restricted from living in one of those buildings. I think it's a good idea to have caretakers. I think having lights on in buildings keep people who shouldn't be there out of there. But I think we need to look at that as it relates to the township policy on residences.
My question, I guess, is if this is an accessory use, how would we say that something is an accessory use as a residential unit, say at the Willows or something, unless they were some way, shape, or form associated with the township and the responsibility of being a caretaker or something like that? I mean, it wouldn't seem to me to be logical that it would be an accessory use if we're just renting it out to whomever, you know.
No,
pays
we
the-
rent it out to people who are not employees of the township in several instances. There is one instance where the woman does work for the township. So they strictly pay rent every month, and they occupy the either one of the floors in one of the large houses or one of the outbuildings.
I actually have a question about L2, which I do know came up with the Willows lease thing. We don't get any business taxes from these nonprofits who are selling retail, presumably in some fashion, a little bit in competition with our... John, I'm sorry, just if you could come up to the podium. So they're paying a business tax to Radnor of some sort, some kind of revenue? Do we see any revenue from that?
They are liable for the taxes under our current rules. Our current rules, you don't pay on the first 25,000. So if they go above 25,000, which would probably make them very happy, they would then pay taxes. So they're not exempt from the MERC taxes, for example.
Because our nonprofits don't pay taxes on the first 25,000, is that
No,
the...
no. Even Gennardi's doesn't pay taxes on the first 25,000. Oh. That's why I said the fact that they're a nonprofit has nothing to do.
It has to do with
that.
volume of 25,000
Right.
per year?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
All right. After L2? I think we're finished with that one. Any more comments on that one? Sounds like to me that if we were to accept that language, but to say as part of a recommendation, it must be covered in the administrative code, that certainly sounds like the way to.
What is that code referred to? I mean, is there a policy and procedures within the township? Administrative code? Okay, yeah.
Okay. L2, we talked about L3. M? M1?
M1, I would, if I had my druthers, I would strike the changes in M1 altogether for now. If we want, when we go back and view the zoning ordinance as a whole, you know, then we may come back and revisit this and decide we want to do that. But there are too many, after having looked at, helped, you know, review the cell tower ordinance, for lack of a better term, I'd rather just not have that there for now, until we've had more of an opportunity to talk about it. Does that make sense?
I have a question on that. Since many of these changes are to deal with situations that everybody knows about but are not in compliance, do we already have in some way cell phone facilities on township property? So if you strike this, then you're kind of telegraphing that that's not a permitted use.
How about if we put it, okay, how about if we said that it would only be acceptable for towers constructed before July 4th, 2010.
Or you
public
would say it's a permitted use if it is predates today, yeah.
Well,
Today.
you do realize at the top, they have to go to the zoning hearing board and go through a special exception. So it's not just a blanket give me. I mean, there are some requirements. You know, Part M requires authorized by a special exception.
I know, I agree with Doug here. Maybe we can put in wording existing or as of today's date or something, till we have a chance to see the wireless ordinance that we worked on back a few months ago. I actually would want to reread it and see where did we finally, and just make sure that there's nothing that we're passing tonight that because the cell phone tower ordinance hasn't gone through to the board yet, we're creating an unintended consequence. So, with regard to M1, some wording like Doug's saying that would just provide for existing towers as of right now, and let's deal with this one after we see our other ordinance go through.
Comment I'd like to make on that. I think the big problem here is the tower. And if it's a generator that's needed to boost the signal on this tower that's here, or it's an outbuilding or a control panel, that I think you should restrict it to towers per se and not strike telecommunication facilities.
Could we do that, Dan? Could we say structures taller than 40 feet or something to restrict the height? I mean,
Where did 40 feet come from?
Dan, numbers get thrown out all the time.
All right,
I'm just saying, I'm throwing it out. There's a couple things that concern me. I think this could be potentially the most, challenging one for me personally, because I think there is a market, there's a ready market for these towers. There are companies who lease these towers all over the Delaware Valley, and if we don't have some restriction on it, we could be looking at an application next month. That would be my only concern. Anywhere.
Well, I wish I had made a copy of the cell phone ordinance that we just went through, because a lot of this we all hashed out previously. Now we're just talking about one zoning district out of all the possible zoning districts that.
But it hasn't
we've
been
already
approved yet.
Well, it's already gone through this board.
I understand, but it's not on the books yet with the Board of Commissioners.
Well,
That's what I was asking you about
that's
last
right.
month.
May I try to clarify? Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, please. But the existing ordinance that the board hasn't passed is a modification of our existing wireless. It's 28164, where it talks about facilities out of the right of way. And wireless communications with support structures includes 3 districts. It's agricultural, conservation, planned laboratory office, and public land use. So currently, there is a wireless ordinance that applies to public land use. And I think, Dan, I'm trying to paraphrase here, but I think what Dan's trying to say is that this is making it consistent with this other part of the ordinance, which already exists. And I don't think that the new ordinance that hasn't gone before the commissioners and been approved actually changes that at all. The modifications didn't involve, public land use, and again, this is wireless communication facilities with support structures. And if you'd like, Doug, I'll leave this up there with you. You can glance at it, or I can read it now if you want. It's only a paragraph.
1 second, Rick. Dan, where is the wireless code? Is it up to commissioners yet?
Yeah, it's back. It went to the solicitor, and I don't know why it hasn't been back on the board's agenda, but that's where it needs to go next.
But again, that's a modification of the existing
Right.
wireless that's already on the books, which includes PLU.
Read the
Okay, well,
wireless,
then read
please.
Okay.
It was one
This is-
paragraph.
This has to do with PLU. This is facilities out of the right-of-way. There's an A, which deals with wireless communication facilities attached to building or structures. PLU is not included in that A. It's included in B, and I will read B. wireless communication facilities with support structures. Wireless communication facilities with support structures shall not exceed a maximum height of 120 feet. Where permitted, a minimum setback shall be maintained from all property lines a distance equal to 75% of the structure's height. However, in no case shall a wireless communication facility with a support structure be located within 200 feet of any adjacent residential zoning district or property used for residential purposes. Wireless communication facilities with support structures shall be permitted within the following zoning districts as a secondary use when authorized by the zoning hearing board as a special exception subsequent to the requirements of this article and additional standards prescribed in 28145. And then it lists those three districts: agricultural conservation, planned laboratory office, and public land use. And again, this is the current ordinance, not the modified ordinance, which will come before the board shortly.
I thought we lowered the height of those support structures in the modified. Maybe it was the accessory structures. Remember, we had a long conversation about.
The telephone pole approach. It
Right,
was the
so
public utilities.
We
that-
didn't bring down the height of the
No.
wireless support structure, the ones with structures.
No.
I don't seem to have the proposed wireless.
Well, so it would be acceptable to say subject to the approval of the proposed wireless, just in case there's a major change that's coming from the commissioners?
I tend to side with Doug. I think this is absolutely where we run into the most burden. I mean, I didn't know before we went into this wireless discussion that there was an application to put a tower behind the Willows Mansion. I mean, I've been sitting on the planning board for 7.5 years. I mean, I would say, let's go slowly here and strike the language.
Or include the language and put a date that the tower had to be up, and that date's like yesterday, or the 4th of July. Make it patriotic. You know.
There's an application.
There was at one point.
At the Willows?
Yes.
Right. It was never officially
Okay,
submitted.
I stand by my original statement. Until the wireless ordinance is in, I'm not going to support M.
So just show of hands. All in favor of just striking the language? Got 1, 2, 3, 4 opposed? Okay, so I'm going to assume that's a strike. Let's keep going. Section 2, M, Section 2, repealer. Comments?
Rick's comments. Dan, is this a concern, that it abrogates our wireless ordinance? Section 2?
I will bring it up with the solicitor. I mean, it
Okay.
certainly could be that way.
Okay, so we need clarification on Section 2 just as a matter of language, law. Okay.
I do have the question. If we have currently cell phone antennas on the tower out back, I mean, if somebody wanted to bring a suit, could we be required to take them down because it's not in compliance?
Not in compliance with what?
Well,
Current-
are they currently allowed?
Public land use.
Huh?
It's allowed in PLU.
They go to zoning variance.
Okay.
Well, Rick just read you
They
the
still get a
language.
variance.
It's permitted in public land use now.
Right.
Yes.
All right, Section 3. Any comments? And finally, Section 4. So as a group, are we willing to pass this subject to 3 items I think we came down to? Let me try to highlight them one more time, make sure I got them right. In L1, we want to make it clear that there'll be language covered in the administrative code dealing with township employees
Or appointed officials.
or appointed officials.
Elected or appointed officials.
Thank you. In M1, we want to strike the changes for now. And in M1, Section 2, we want this language reviewed by the solicitor before it goes to commissioners. So are they,
That's- That's just technically Section 2, I think.
Is
Or is that part of M1?
I think it's part of M1, isn't
Is
it?
it?
Separate
It's its own
section,
separate-
okay.
Yep.
So with those three modifications, are we willing to, someone willing to give me a motion to pass this?
I'll motion to approve with those modifications.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Aye. Opposed.
So one opposed, so. And the motion carries. Thank you. Good job, everybody. That moves us to our next agenda item. SD 2010-S02, a sketch plan. David and Ruth Walker, the applicants here. Subdivide existing parcels into two lots at 344 King of Prussia Road. Sketch plan, again, for anybody that's new, there's no public comment. We'd like a 5-minute or so overview of what you're attempting to do, and then we'll talk about it and give you our comments. Identify yourself, sir, and go right ahead.
Good evening, Madam, gentlemen. My name is John Smirga. I'm the engineer who prepared this plan. The plan shows a piece of property which is about 24,000 square feet. It's at the corner presently of Glen Mary Road and King of Prussia Road. There's an existing building on it right now, which is, if you will, shown on Lot 2. It's the yellow piece right here, with a driveway outlined in orange going in this direction.
Sir, do we have a hand mic there? Or can you move that mic over so you're clear? Hand mic around, Dan? Sir, hand mic? Should be, is in the podium there? Is there a hand mic? If not, go right ahead.
It is the intention of the owner, Dr. Walker, to subdivide this piece of property into two parcels. It's presently in the R3 zoning district. It abuts on the westerly side an R3 zone, and on the southerly side a CO zone. The applicant, again, wants to subdivide it into two parcels that would meet all zoning applications and bulk rates and ordinance requirements. We have prepared this sketch plat to present to the board for their review, comments, and so we can see where we are and how we would carry forward with this application. I have reviewed and I have seen the memorandum which was prepared on July 1st by this board. There are 9 items on it, most of which are, the first 5 items are boilerplate, which obviously will be done, which is part of the subdivision ordinance if we carry forward on a formal application and a formal presentation of a plan. So those boilerplate items would obviously be done. Item 6, the driveway. There was a comment about the bulk zoning of Lot 2 and showing that house. We are not sure whether the house would be raised or not. If the house is raised, then obviously a brand-new proposal would be made, and that house would be engineered properly on the site. If the existing house is going to stay, then the bulk requirements and the percent covers and all that would be added to the secondary plan that would be submitted. In either case, I agree the driveway that is shown precariously going kitty corner from Glen Mary to King of Prussia is not the best planning, and I'm sure any further discussions would put it back into some classical driveway scheme that would prevent shortcutting across that lot.
Just for background, the existing house is being used as a residence now?
The existing house is vacant.
Vacant, okay.
It's not the greatest house, and there was intent to use it as a commercial piece of property, which fell by the wayside. So now the client is gone for, its intended use, which is residential. The last three items, 7, 8, and 9, the extension of the sewer, obviously that would have to be done. So yes, we would extend the sewer up 50, 60 feet, whatever is necessary, so a sewer lateral could get to that manhole, that terminal manhole, without crossing another piece of property. So that would be done. I've talked to Dr. Walker about that, and he knows that that would have to be done. Granite curbs along Glen Mary, obviously that's part of the subdivision requirements and would be shown as appropriately, along with the sidewalks.
I'm just trying to picture this corner. This is that big brown house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go to Dan, and then we'll come back just in a second, sir. Dan, you want to comment on any of your 9 comments?
No, I think Mr. Smurga touched on them all.
Okay.
The first 6 are really geared towards the sketch plan phase, and the last 3 were really, I guess, lack of a better word, food for thought when it comes back as a minor final plan. So it is relatively straightforward. What you see is really all that can be done with it. No more than 2 lots can be put on here. We had looked at actually flipping it, so both houses fronted on King of Prussia Road, and it does not comply with the zoning to do that. So this is the only configuration that works for this subdivision.
But it does work, Dan, from a
Yeah,
measurement point of view? There's
it
no
complies.
complies
What's
with
shown here, it
everything?
complies. The building envelope, you can see basically the square or the rectangle on each lot. That's where the footprint of the house could fit. So actually, Lot 1, the property to the left could shift a little bit closer and go a little bit further west than what is shown. And the same with the house on Lot 2. That can be shifted slightly left also.
But Lot 2, the existing house, is not 100% in the building envelope?
That's correct. And that's not in the building envelope today.
Correct.
So if the issue was on the left-hand side of Lot 2, and he drew it to show the house was not in the envelope, then there would be a problem. But
Gotcha.
the fact that it's the rear property line that's non-conforming.
Is that a porch or a garage or something that could be easily moved to
Well,
the inside the envelope?
it
or
is a porch, but it's also part of the structure.
Yeah, the one with the X on it is a porch.
That's a porch, okay.
But you can see there's a little bit, there's probably 3, 4, 5 feet of structure that would be attached to that porch.
Okay.
If a decision were made to demolish the existing building, would you change the division of the lot in any way? Like, because one lot is 10,000 square feet, the other one's 14.
Well, because of the front yards that are needed on both King of Prussia Road and Glen Mary, the bigger lot has to be Lot 2, and give it, enough building envelope to put a reasonable house on it. So you need the 2 35-foot front yards and a 15-foot side yard. So you're taking 50 feet out of the lot already.
Dan, the garage doesn't have to, on Lot 1, doesn't have to have the 15-foot setback?
No, it's an accessory structure. So this zoning district, it's 10 feet.
Okay,
If it was an attached garage, then it would have to
okay.
meet that setback.
And we'll get all the calculations with all the building and macadam and garage. It's all still under the, what is it, 25%?
A 25-foot building, 25% building, and 35% total.
That's my comment number 1.
Right.
All the zoning information needs to be shown.
But your
for
quick
both.
numbers, it's, even though it's not on here, it all met the requirements?
Yeah, it looks like it's fine.
Okay.
Dan, so are you proposing sidewalk on the Glen Mary side of the structures as well?
Glen Mary and King of Prussia, both roads.
Okay, and there is an existing sidewalk directly across the street on Glen Mary, or there is not? I can't.
Well, there's just a little piece at the church. There's really well, I was going to say a handicap ramp, but it's not a handicap ramp.
Because I know there's some fairly steep elevations along Glenmary, and whether it really would make sense to have both sides of the street with sidewalks from an engineering perspective.
Well, King of Prussia Road is a little more difficult, and there's no sidewalks to the left or right of this property until you get down to the next block at Belrose, and then it is sidewalked on this side of the street. But there are no sidewalks to the north of this property on both sides of King of Prussia.
Yeah, so from an engineering perspective, you think that we could accommodate sidewalks on both Glenmary and King of Prussia roads?
Well, Glenmary, it would be easier to do. King of Prussia is a little more difficult, but it could be done. There is a drop-off from King of Prussia Road to Lot 2.
Right.
So there would be some regrading would have to be done to accommodate that.
But that would be consistent with our policy to try to put as much sidewalk in, so pedestrian walkways. I mean, one of the alternatives that had been discussed to this, the thing from the St. David's train station down to Eastern College was going down King of Prussia Road. So that would be, what, another 300 feet?
Right.
That'll already be in place?
Right.
The one thing that would have to be looked at, and it may become critical, is if we put sidewalks on there, we're going to have to dedicate right-of-way. Along King of Prussia, that can be done because the land use goes out to the center line of the street. So, using the gross area of Lot 2, that would be all right. But if we start adjusting right-of-ways along Glenmary, we would have to adjust the lot lines because, then I don't know how that would work, Dan.
No, you're correct. There
You
have
and
to
I
be,
would have to work out, again, would the gross be allowable out to the title line?
the impervious is based on the gross lot area.
Right, but as you can see, the title line is not out in the middle of the road as normal. It's
Right.
right along the curb line.
Yes,
So the gross of Lot 1 would still go to that title line?
yes.
Okay. Then my point is moot. We would give right-of-way, but the title of the land would still be grossly owned by Lot 1, and we can then put the sidewalk on public land or public right-of-way.
You said the house has been vacant. How long has it been vacant?
Years,
And how long has the current owner owned the property?
a couple of years.
And you said they wanted to do office here. I don't remember that coming here. Was it ever formally, so it was never formally submitted?
No, it was never
That's all.
formally submitted. There was discussions with the current landowners around it. There was objections. There was a lot of coming and going, to and froing. So Dr. Walker decided to not pursue that because we were going to have to get a change of zoning. So the only thing he can do now with a piece of property that he owns is to put it in residential.
Okay, so you have talked to the neighbors,
Yes.
and this is what they would prefer?
I don't know if this is what they prefer, but
They don't want
this
an
is what's
office there.
allowed.
Okay, gotcha.
Dan, just one other question on the sidewalk. If it's determined from an engineering perspective that it doesn't really, or it's not logical to put the sidewalk on the north side of the property, is it the Glenmary
Glenmary.
side? Is there any instance where you could potentially have the applicant fund the sidewalk on the other side of the street?
Well, it's been done. It's been done in the past. So it's possible to do that.
I mean, that intersection there seems to me like it could use a sidewalk, I mean, based on the fact that you have the elementary school right across King of Prussia Road. But it might put the applicant in hardship to do it on that side of the street. If there's an existing sidewalk that could just be enlarged or, somehow modified on the opposite side.
I don't think there's a lot of sidewalk over there. I think it's right at the corner There's a little wall. It's a little difficult to see, but there's a wall at the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really the only area that there's any sidewalk.
This wall exists right now, and there's just a few feet left. The grades there would have to, it would be some serious work to be done because the curbs are very erratic in their heights.
And what about the width? Is it 3 feet wide? That piece of sidewalk here, is that 3 feet wide? Or much less
It
than-
may be, or somewhere around 3 feet wide.
But
It goes right from
Not
the
4.
wall right to the edge of the curb,
It's less than 4.
and it's probably less than 3 or 4.
What's to
I'm
the
looking about
west,
accessibility.
what's to the west of the property as far as sidewalk is concerned? Is the
There
neighbor?
is
Nothing.
none.
Nothing on either side of the street?
I mean, that just becomes an engineering question, Dan. I mean, if the applicant would be willing, if it makes more sense to have the sidewalk on the north side of Glen Mary, that seems to me more logical.
Yeah, I think I think the church comes out very close to the street. And there's some buttresses that come out, so I'd have to take a harder look at it.
But then you don't get the continuity of coming around King of Prussia.
Yeah, that's-
That'd be the trade-off.
Yeah.
And again, right-of-way issues may come into play where, we'd have to put, we can't speak for how the right-of-way would work across the street.
No,
so-
I understand. I just know that there's some elevation change as you go further, I guess, which way we're going. As you head down Glen Mary.
Well, I mean, yeah, but it's, the lawn and the street are fairly level you are coming up grade, but there's not a drop-off. There's not a significant change in elevation from the lawn to the street, but they are all coming uphill at the same rate.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is if there's an application at some point from the church, I'd hate to see the sidewalk gone, a block, on one side of the street, and then we have an opportunity not to extend it all the way down Glen Mary.
So if the church submitted an application, right?
Dan, how about steep slope? We haven't talked about that in a long time.
Well, there are
get-
some
there's
steep
issues going from-
slopes around the existing house that, and then there's some slopes up along King of Prussia Road. So, I mean, they've all been man-made when they built the house and when they widened King of Prussia Road. So there's been a lot of changes to the lot.
And they'll be taken into consideration for the calculations?
Yes.
Okay. Any other
But-
questions for Dan?
But fortunately, the steep slopes happen pretty much right along the property line, or the internal property line. So you do have, a flat on most of Lot 2, except for right at the extreme edge of the King of Prussia Road, you do have a little dipsy-do going down of 3 or 4 feet. But Lot 1 is fairly flat, except for, again, the steep slope that happens right at the internal property line.
As a matter of my interest, if you're going to put a sidewalk, when you put the sidewalk along King of Prussia Road, what level, I would assume you put it at street level, or, a couple inches above.
That's going to be difficult because you do have that abrupt change in elevation. So you would either going to have to go downgrade and put it, 4 or 5 feet away from the curb line, lower by 3 or 4 feet. Or you're going to have to do some serious grade modifications and then relocate the steep slope, if you will, to the inboard side of the sidewalk.
And that brings up the issues of erosion and so forth. You'd have to plant stuff there to prevent it. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? for
I
Dan
just
for
have
the
one last
applicant?
question.
Go ahead.
One quick question. How big of a house do we think that's going to be on Lot 1? I'm just curious square footage. I'm trying to place it.
On Lot 1, I think I'm showing a house that's 1,350 square feet per floor, so about a 2,600 square foot house,
Okay.
with a accessory garage, plus the accessory garage, which is probably another 450 square feet.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much, sir. Takes us to, not on a sketch plan, not on a sketch plan. We still have an opening on the Environmental Advisory Council. Is it hot enough for anybody to volunteer tonight? Keep that in mind. Mr. Rhodes will be bugging you. Any old business we want to cover? Any new business? Any comments from the public? Have a motion to adjourn? Come right up and identify yourself. I almost missed you.
My name is Ina Shea. I live at 690 Glen Mary Road, in the closest residential property to the Walker property.
We're not taking comment on the Walker property tonight. It's just a sketch plan,
Okay,
and then when they formally submit it, then you come back and make that comment.
okay.
Okay?
The neighbors will be happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Anything else? Motion to adjourn? So moved. May I have a second?
Second.